Welcome to episode 3 of the Dr. Greg Linville Show. I'm Kelvin Anderson, producer and director of the show. In episode 1 and 2, Dr. Linville discussed why after so many years, he finally wrote The Christology of Sports Ministry. He also gave us some of the dangers that emerge when Christ is no longer kept at the center of ministry. Today, Dr. Linville turns our attention to a foundational question. Who is the Christ of sports ministry? Is Jesus merely a New Testament figure, or is he a central figure of the entire biblical story? In this episode, Dr. Linville discusses the Christ of the whole Bible, and why a proper understanding of Jesus must begin with seeing him as the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan, from Genesis all the way to Revelation. Now, here's your host, Pastor Dan Stoffer.
So Greg, Christology, I think that's starting to make sense, but Jesus throughout the whole Bible, Old Testament included?
Well, yes, and this surprises a lot of people. But as we're talking to sports ministers and we're talking to people in the church that are trying to be Christocentric, this is the Christology of the sports outreach community, this book that we've been talking about. Sometimes we just say Jesus was only in the Gospels. I have a very good friend who's a pastor, and he asked me to preach at his church, and I get to the pulpit, and there's this little plaque right there on the pulpit. Nobody can see but him. And it says, "We would see Jesus." Like the people that came to the early disciples and said, "We would see Jesus." Yeah. And I asked him about that, and he said, "That's there." And I got it from somebody else. He said, "It's on many pulpits," because that reminds us we've got to be Christocentric. Yeah. So, Christocentric in sports ministry, that's what we're talking about. And so I asked, okay, I would assume that, but you only preach out of the Gospels? He goes, no, that's the key to this. That it's the Jesus of the entire Bible. I said, tell me about that. And we can just generally speak about it right now, that in the Old Testament, the Jesus is predicted, prophesied. They're the roles of Jesus that came through the prophets and the priest and the kings, David, etc. And so all of that kind of shows us what Jesus is supposed to be, who he's supposed to be. But it also really predicts very specifically he's going to be born here, and it's going to come out of there. And it's unbelievable the amount of prophecies that are fulfilled that over hundreds and hundreds of years you couldn't get any other way. Yeah. So yes, certainly through the Old Testament. And then he's predicted in the Old Testament. You come to the Gospels, he's revealed. We see him from these 4 different perspectives. And then the book of Acts, he's preached, he's taught. People are starting to start churches around him. And then the epistles, those are the letters that Paul and Peter and John and those guys wrote. And that comes teaching us more about Jesus and the doctrine about Jesus and how to live like Jesus and how to think like Jesus. And then all of that leads up to the book of Revelation that talks about that Jesus is going to come again. And so the whole Bible is about Jesus.
He truly is the Alpha and the Omega. He's throughout the entirety of Scripture. And so if a sports minister recognizes, I don't know if I've had that kind of view, I don't know if that's been my theology, well, how can we get them on the right path to make sure that they truly see Jesus throughout the Old and New Testament?
Well, the book helps do this in a couple ways. And we're not trying to just do exactly what the book, because read the book, okay? Yeah. But the book will direct the sports minister to the local church or the church leader on some things like this that they may never have thought about. And so what we're trying to help is both with this, there's a whole chapter on the Christ of the whole Bible that they can go and think about, but also we have another chapter just on the historic Christian creeds. And for the sports minister who's empowering his volunteers that we call local church sports missionaries, when they go to those post-game devotionals or they come to those individual conversations with the people that are far from Jesus that have been invited into this league, these people are coming in with all kinds of questions about Jesus and about Christianity and about the church. And so part of what we've tried to do in these chapters and in this book is to give the sports minister and the other leaders some basic guidance to say, if this question is being asked, if these are the things that people are saying, I don't understand this, people have been dealing with those questions for 2,000 years, Dan. Mm-hmm. And so this book is not designed to have every single answer,
sure,
but rather give people the avenues that they can find the answers, and they can go and they can start to answer those questions because they get better educated. So, yes, sports ministers, you do need to know how to referee. You do need to know how to sweep the floor. So you're the official, you're the maintenance person.
Yep.
You do need to know how to lead other leaders. You do need to, but you also need to be able to know your own theology
mm-hmm.
of Jesus. That's part of what this book is trying to do, is to help get you better at your own theology so that your Christology is really solid. We talked about in previous sessions that it helps you stay focused. Christology helps you stay focused on evangelistic disciple making. But then part of that is when you are receiving these questions, was the Virgin Mary really a virgin? Was she perfect too? Was Jesus really God and man? Was these kind of Christological questions were helping you get those answers so that you can answer them, so that you can actually bring somebody who's far from Jesus to a faith in Jesus.
Yeah. You know, you think about the average sports rec and fitness minister and all that they have on their plate, and I think you described it well. They're refereeing, they're organizing, they're recruiting, they're using technology to map out their schedules and everything else going on. But to develop their theology, that has to be something that is of utmost importance for them so that they can minister effectively, so that as they do their own quiet time with God, they're seeing Christ throughout the entirety of the Bible. But also, Greg, I think it helps them to be understood and seen by the elders and the senior pastor as somebody who's a valuable part,
without a doubt,
and taken more seriously as they develop their Christology and their theology in general. Thoughts on that?
It'll help you as the sports minister keep your job. Because most times you as a sports minister, you're perceived as a guy who just prays before you play.
Yeah.
But when you come to the staff meeting and you say to your senior pastor and your elders and your leaders, what's our Christology? Right away they say, what? Well, have we thought about our missiology? Have we thought about our soteriology? Oh, hey, wait a minute. All these ologies. You're just supposed to pray and play. We have had senior pastors come to us, denominational heads come to us in CSRM, and they said, your sports minister gets this evangelistic disciple making better than anybody I know of.
Wow.
That's what we're trying to help the sports minister at the local church know how to do, to figure all those ologies in to really be effectively reaching people who are far from Jesus. So, yes, Dan, if you as a sports minister out there, if you can get into these books, if you can get into this whole concept of knowing what you believe about Christ and how it can be focusing you on actually doing evangelistic disciple making, you're going to answer all those questions of ecclesiology, mm-hmm. of soteriology, of missiology. You're going to have to go get dictionaries, I know, but it's going to help you do this.
Yeah.
And then they're going to say, this isn't just a guy who prays and plays or a gal who just exercises with somebody in front and leads them through the exercise of a fitness class. Yeah. They really know Jesus, and they really know theology, and they know how to make pragmatic things happen that's growing our church because they're reaching people and bringing them to Jesus.
you might get some people some raises, which is really exciting.
We would hope. We would hope.
And it's keeping the main thing the main thing. And so if Jesus
Yes.
is the main thing,
Yes.
if it's Christology and throughout the entire Bible, maybe a really cool practical thing for the average local church sports minister to think about as they develop their devotionals, and we can help with that, but is to perhaps look at taking an entire year, mapping out different classes and seasons, and go through the entire Bible, making sure that they highlight Jesus in the Old and the New Testament, looking at prophecy about his birth right before Christmas, looking at his life and ministry around Easter, looking at some really obscure passages like about Melchizedek in Genesis and looking at the foreshadowing of Christ. Have fun with this.
Yes.
Making Jesus the center.
Exactly right.
Thank you for joining us for episode 3 of the Dr. Greg Linville Show. If you enjoyed today's discussion on the Christ of the whole Bible, we'd encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this episode with others who may benefit from the conversation. On our next episode, Dr. Linville and Pastor Dan Stoffer will continue exploring the themes and implications of the Christology of sports ministry. Until next time, keep competing for Christ. Take care.